In this video, we will cover the presidency of Lyndon B. Johnson and the Great Society. After the death of John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, a former U.S. Senator from Texas, becomes the nation's 36th president. He enters the office with the goal of continuing JFK's legacy. LBJ created a set of programs aimed at ending poverty and racial injustice. He created the Economic Opportunity Act with $1 billion budget, sponsoring a wide variety of self-help programs for the poor, such as Head Start for preschoolers, Job Corps for vocational education, VISTA, Volunteer in Service to America, and the Community Action Program, which encouraged poor people to participate in public works programs. A major accomplishment of the Great Society was the expansion of healthcare coverage to more Americans. The Medicare program, providing hospital and medical insurance for Americans aged 65 or older, was signed into law as an amendment to the Social Security Act of 1935. Some 19 million people enrolled in Medicare when it went into effect in 1966. Medicaid, a state and federally funded program that offers health coverage to certain low-income people, was signed into law by President Johnson on July 30, 1965, as another amendment to the Social Security Act. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act represented a major commitment to equal access to quality education. The ESEA funds primary and secondary education, emphasizing high standards and accountability. Funds are authorized for professional development, instructional materials, resources to support educational programs, and promoting parental involvement. The Act was signed into law on April 9, 1965, and its appropriations were to be carried out for the 5 fiscal years. The government has reauthorized this act every 5 years since its enactment. LBJ also signed the Higher Education Act in November of 1965. The act governs federal student aid, increased federal money given to universities, created scholarships, gave low-interest loans to students, and established a national teacher corps. The Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965, also known as the Hart-Celler Act, abolished an earlier quota system based on national origin and established a new immigration policy based on reuniting immigrant families and attracting skilled labor to the United States. Over the next 4 decades, the policies put into effect in 1965 would greatly change the demographic makeup of the American population, as immigrants entering the United States under the new legislation came increasingly from the countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America instead of Europe. LBJ also created 2 new cabinet departments to help in specialized areas. The Department of Transportation was created to deal with national air, rail, and highway transportation. The Department of Housing and Urban Development was created to administer federal housing for the poor. The federal government provided funding for worthy creative and scholarly programs during the Great Society. It helped to establish the National Endowment for the Humanities, an independent federal agency dedicated to supporting research, education, preservation, and public programs in the humanities. The National Endowment for the Arts is another federal agency that offers support and funding for projects exhibiting artistic excellence. PBS, or the Public Broadcasting Service, is a nonprofit organization that provides educational television programming to public television stations around the country. It is funded by both the federal government and by private donations from citizens. Its most notable program is Sesame Street, which has provided children with educational programming for over 50 years. NPR, or National Public Radio, is a private and publicly funded nonprofit media organization that provides news and educational programming on the radio. LBJ, like Teddy Roosevelt during the Progressive Era, wanted to protect consumers with the Great Society. After a study released in the early 1960s linked cigarette smoking to cancer, Congress passed the Cigarette Labeling and Advertising Act. It provided a set of national standards for cigarette packaging. It required tobacco companies to put a warning on the package about the dangers of smoking. Congress also passed the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act, which required labels on consumer products to include the identity of the product, the name and place of the business of the manufacturer, packer, or distributor, and the net quantity of the contents. The federal government also passed the seatbelt law, requiring all vehicles to be fitted with seatbelts in all designated seating positions. Even by the 1980s, only 14% of Americans regularly wore seatbelts. The Supreme Court during the 1960s was known as the Warren Court, named for Chief Justice Earl Warren. It expanded civil rights, civil liberties, and federal power in many ways. It has been widely recognized as a constitutional revolution. Among the many decisions of the Warren Court concerned a defendant's rights. First, in Mapp v. Ohio in 1961, Dolry Mapp was convicted of possessing obscene materials found in an illegal search of her home. The Supreme Court ruled that illegally seized evidence cannot be used in a court against the accused. In Gideon v. Wainwright in 1963, Clarence Gideon requested a lawyer from the state to defend him against charges of breaking and entering. The state refused. The Supreme Court required that state courts provide an attorney for indigent or poor defendants. In Escobedo v. Illinois in 1964, Danny Escobedo confessed to murder after being refused the right to see his lawyer. The Supreme Court required the police to inform an arrested person of his or her right to remain silent, and they have the right to see their attorney. In Miranda v. Arizona in 1966, Ernesto Miranda confessed to kidnapping and rape. The police did not advise him of his right to an attorney during the investigation. The Supreme Court extended the ruling in Escobedo to include the right to having a lawyer present during questioning by the police, and that the police must inform the defendants of their rights. This is known as the Miranda warning. These decisions of the Warren Court deal with freedom of expression and privacy. In Yates v. the United States in 1957, the Supreme Court states that the First Amendment protected radical and revolutionary speech, even by communists, unless there was a clear and present danger to the safety of the country. In Engel v. Vitale in 1962, the Supreme Court ruled that state laws requiring prayer and Bible readings in public schools violated the First Amendment's provision for a separation of church and state. In Griswold v. Connecticut in 1965, the Supreme Court ruled that in recognition of a citizen's right to privacy, a state could not prohibit the use of contraceptives by adults. This privacy case will provide the foundation for later cases establishing a woman's right to an abortion.